What happens when love refuses to accept death? When a heart continues beating even after the body grows cold? When a soul clings so desperately to life that it defies the natural order itself? Welcome to Sherlock Mode. In the heart of Bangkok, where ancient canals wind through bustling streets, lies a district called Khanong. Today, it thrums with modern life, but beneath the surface lurks a story that has haunted Thailand for over 150 years. This is the legend of Mae Nak for Khanong, a tale so powerful that it has been told through generations, adapted into countless films, and turned into one of the most famous ghost stories in all of Southeast Asia. The year was 1851, during the reign of King Rama IV. Thailand was a different world then, a kingdom of wooden houses on stilts, narrow canals, and close-knit communities where everyone knew their neighbors' secrets. In this world lived a young woman named Nak, whose beauty was said to rival the morning lotus. She had found her perfect match in a man named Mac, and their love was the kind that poets write about, pure and devoted. Together, they built their home on the banks of the Phra Canal, a simple wooden house where they dreamed of raising their children and growing old together. Their happiness seemed complete when Nak discovered she was carrying their first child. But fate had other plans. War came to Thailand, and with it, the dreaded conscription. Mac was called to serve his country, torn away from his pregnant wife to fight in the brutal conflicts that plagued the region. As Mac marched away to war, Nak stood on their porch, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other waving goodbye. She had no way of knowing that this would be the last time she would see her husband alive. The war was fierce and unforgiving. Mac fought bravely, but an enemy blade found its mark, leaving him wounded and fighting for his life in a field hospital far from home. For months, he lay between life and death, delirious with fever. Meanwhile, back in Khanong, Nak waited. Each day she would sit by the canal, watching the water flow toward the distant city where her husband fought. Her belly grew round and heavy, but still no word came from the war. Then came the night that would change everything. The monsoon rains had been particularly heavy, and the canal waters ran high and muddy. Nak felt the first sharp pains of labor, but she was alone, so terribly alone. In that small wooden house, with only the sound of rain and thunder for company, Nak fought the hardest battle of her life. She called out for help, but the storm drowned her voice. The other villagers, huddled in their own homes, heard nothing. Hour after hour, she struggled. The pain was unbearable, and she grew weaker with each passing moment. In her delirium, she whispered her husband's name, begging him to come home, to be with her in her darkest hour. As dawn broke, the storm finally passed. The village emerged from their houses to find the canal swollen with muddy water. But from Nak's house came only silence, a silence that would echo through the ages. The neighbors found her there, still and cold, her child beside her. Both mother and baby had died in the terrible struggle of childbirth. The villagers wept for the young woman who had waited so faithfully for her husband's return. They buried Mae Nak and her child in the cemetery at Wat Mahabut, the local temple. The monks performed the proper rituals, praying for their souls to find peace in the afterlife. But peace was the last thing on Nak's mind. Death, it seemed, was not enough to separate Mae Nak from her love. Her spirit, driven by an obsession that transcended the grave, refused to accept its fate. She would wait for Mac, no matter how long it took. Meanwhile, far away in Bangkok, Mac slowly recovered from his wounds. The fever broke, his strength returned, and after months of uncertainty, he was finally well enough to return home. His heart raced with excitement at the thought of seeing his wife and meeting his child. The journey home seemed to take forever. Every mile brought him closer to the life he had left behind, the woman he loved, and the child he had never met. He imagined Nak's smile, her embrace, the sound of a baby's laughter. As his boat approached the familiar bend in the Phra Canal, Mac's heart nearly burst with joy. There, standing on the porch of their little house, was his beloved Nak, holding their child in her arms. She looked exactly as he remembered, beautiful and radiant, as if time had not touched her at all. The baby in her arms was perfect, and Mac felt a surge of pride and love that brought tears to his eyes. They embraced with a passion that seemed to make up for all the lost time. Mac held his wife and child, feeling complete for the first time since he had left for war. Everything was perfect, exactly as it should be. Days turned into weeks, and Mac settled back into his old life. He worked during the day, came home to his family in the evening, and felt blessed beyond measure. Their neighbors, however, seemed strangely distant. When Mac tried to greet his old friends, they would avoid his eyes and hurry away. At the market, vendors would refuse to sell to him, making excuses and closing their stalls. The entire village seemed to be avoiding him. But Mac was too happy to worry much about the strange behavior of others. He had his wife and child, and that was all that mattered. Little did he know that his happiness was built on a foundation of supernatural deception. One brave neighbor, an elderly man who had known Mac since childhood, finally worked up the courage to approach him. With trembling hands and fear in his eyes, he pulled Mac aside. The old man's words were like ice water in Mac's veins. "Your wife is dead," he whispered. "She died in childbirth while you were away. We buried her and the baby months ago. What you're living with is not human." Mac's world shattered. He laughed, then he raged, then he pleaded. It couldn't be true. His wife was alive, his child was real. He had held them, spoken with them, shared meals with them. The old man must be lying, or mad, or jealous. But as Mac stormed home, other villagers whispered the same terrible truth. Mae Nak was dead, had been dead for months. The grave at Wat Mahabat was real, the funeral had been real, but somehow, impossibly, she had returned. That night, Mac lay awake beside his wife, studying her face in the moonlight. She looked so real, so alive. Her chest rose and fell with each breath. Her skin was warm to the touch. How could she be dead? But now he began to notice things he had missed before. The way she never seemed to eat the food he prepared. The way their child never cried or made any sound. The way the house felt cold even in the tropical heat. The turning point came the next evening. Nak was preparing their dinner, grinding chili paste in the traditional way. As she worked, she hummed a gentle lullaby, the picture of domestic contentment. Suddenly, a lime slipped from her hands and rolled off the porch, falling toward the canal below. Without thinking, Nak reached down to retrieve it, her arm stretching longer and longer, far beyond what any human arm could reach. Mac watched in horror as his wife's arm extended 3, 4, 5 feet beyond its natural length, bending and stretching like a snake as she casually picked up the lime and returned to her cooking as if nothing had happened. The truth hit him like a physical blow. His neighbors had been right. His wife was dead. What he had been living with, loving, holding close to his heart, was something else entirely. Something that should not exist. This was the major turning point. Everything Mac thought he knew about his life, his love, his happiness, had been a lie. The woman he adored was a ghost, and he was living in a nightmare disguised as a dream. That night, Mac pretended to sleep, but his mind raced with terror and confusion. When he was certain that Nak was asleep, he crept from their bed and tiptoed toward the door, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she could hear it. He made it to the porch, then to the canal bank, then to the village path. Freedom was just steps away when he heard her voice behind him, soft and confused. "Mac, my love, where are you going?" He turned to see Mae Nak standing on their porch, her figure pale and ethereal in the moonlight. But now he could see the truth that had been hidden from him. She was transparent, like morning mist, and her eyes held the empty stare of the dead. Mac ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, crashing through the jungle paths that led away from the canal. Behind him, he could hear Nak calling his name, her voice growing closer despite his desperate speed. The villagers had told him about the Blumia plant, whose sticky leaves were said to repel ghosts. Mac spotted a cluster of the plants and dove behind them, pressing himself against the earth, praying that the old superstitions were true. For long minutes, he heard Mae Nak's voice calling for him, searching, pleading. Then, as if the plant had indeed protected him, her voice began to fade. But Mac knew this was only a temporary reprieve. When dawn broke, Mac emerged from his hiding place and made his way to the only sanctuary he knew could protect him from the supernatural. Wat Mahabat, the temple where his wife's body was buried, was also his only hope of survival. Thai temples are sacred ground, places where evil spirits cannot tread. As Mac crossed the threshold of Wat Mahabat, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Here, at least, he would be safe from Mae Nak's supernatural pursuit. But Mae Nak's love had turned into something darker, more desperate. Denied her husband's presence, her spirit began to lash out at the living. The villagers of Phra Khanong found themselves facing a nightmare. Windows shattered without cause. Doors slammed shut on their own. The canal waters turned black and foul. Those who had warned Mac about his wife's true nature began to disappear. One by one, their bodies found floating in the dark water. Mae Nak's fury was like a force of nature, unstoppable and terrible. She had become what the Thai call a Phai Thai Hong, a vengeful spirit driven by violent death and unfulfilled desire. The entire village lived in fear. The villagers begged the monks at Wat Mahabut to help them. Something had to be done about Mae Nak's spirit, or the entire community would be destroyed by her rage. The temple's most powerful monk agreed to face the ghost. The monk's name was Samdej Phra Putijan, and he was known throughout the region for his spiritual power. He had faced demons before, but never a spirit driven by love turned into obsession. This would be his greatest challenge. The confrontation came at midnight, when the supernatural forces were strongest. The monk stood in the village square, chanting ancient prayers, while Mae Nak's spirit materialized before him, her form shifting between beautiful woman and terrifying specter. The spiritual battle was fierce and long. Mae Nak's love had given her power, but the monk's training and compassion were stronger. Slowly, gradually, he began to bind her spirit with sacred words and holy symbols. In the end, the monk captured Mae Nak's spirit, confining it within a clay jar marked with protective symbols. With great ceremony, he carried the jar to the Phra Khanong Canal and threw it into the deep waters, where it sank without a trace. For a time, peace returned to Phra Khanong. The supernatural attacks stopped, the canal waters cleared, and the villagers began to rebuild their lives. But the story of Mae Nak was far from over. Years later, according to some versions of the legend, the jar was found by fishermen who opened it out of curiosity. Mae Nak's spirit escaped once again, but this time she seemed less angry, more sorrowful. Other versions say that a more powerful monk eventually performed a ceremony to help Mae Nak's spirit find peace, allowing her to move on to the afterlife. But her legend lived on, growing stronger with each telling. Today, Mae Nak's influence extends far beyond the borders of Thailand. Her story has inspired films, television shows, and urban legends throughout Southeast Asia. The most famous adaptation was the 1999 film Nong Nak, which became a cultural phenomenon. The story has been retold in dozens of films, from the 1959 silent version to modern horror adaptations. Each generation finds new meaning in Mae Nak's tale, new ways to explore the boundaries between love and obsession. Television series, stage plays, and even comic books have featured Mae Nak's story. She has become more than a ghost story. She is a cultural icon, representing the power of love to transcend death itself. The shrine dedicated to Mae Nak at Wat Mahabut remains one of Bangkok's most visited spiritual sites. Thousands of people come each year to pay respects to her spirit and ask for her blessings. Pregnant women pray to Mae Nak for safe childbirth, remembering her own tragic fate. Young men ask her to protect them from military conscription, knowing how war separated her from her beloved husband. Mae Nak is also known for her supposed ability to predict lottery numbers. On drawing nights, the shrine overflows with hopeful gamblers seeking her supernatural guidance for worldly fortune. But what makes Mae Nak's story so enduring? Why has this tale of love and loss resonated across cultures and generations? Perhaps because it speaks to our deepest fears and desires. Mae Nak represents the fear that love might not be enough to overcome death, and the hope that it might be. Her story asks whether there are some bonds so strong that even death cannot break them. The legend also explores the dark side of love, showing how devotion can become obsession, how protection can become possession, and how the desire to preserve happiness can destroy it. In Thai culture, Mae Nak serves as a warning about the dangers of attachment, a Buddhist concept that teaches us to let go of earthly desires, even love, to find true peace. Yet the story also celebrates the power of love to transcend all boundaries. Mae Nak's devotion, though ultimately destructive, comes from a place of pure love that many find admirable and moving. Some scholars believe that Mae Nak's story reflects the social anxieties of 19th century Thailand, when warfare frequently separated families and women often died in childbirth without modern medical care. Others see in Mae Nak a feminist icon, a woman who refused to accept the limitations imposed on her by society and death itself. Her story gives voice to women who died unheard and unloved. The question remains, was Mae Nak real? Historical evidence is scarce, but some records suggest that a woman named Nak did die in childbirth in Phra, Khanong during the 1850s. Whether Mae Nak was real or not, her story has become real in the hearts and minds of millions. She represents something fundamental about the human experience, the refusal to let go of love, even when we must. The canal waters still flow past the spot where Mae Nak's house once stood. The old wooden structure is long gone, replaced by modern buildings, but the memory of her love story endures. Late at night, when the moon is full and the canal runs silver, some say you can still hear Mae Nak's voice calling across the water, forever seeking her beloved husband, forever hoping he will return. Mae Nak's story teaches us that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force in the universe. It can create life, sustain hope, and yes, even survive death itself. The legend of Mae Nak Phra Khanong remains one of the most compelling ghost stories ever told, a tale that continues to haunt and inspire people around the world, reminding us that some loves are truly eternal. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery, like and subscribe to Sherlock Mode.